I'd like to move on now and invite Mr. Aaron Addison, who's Vice President for Geospatial World of the Americas, up on stage to take our next panel. And along with the speakers, please, who I believe are David Henderson, Bjoern Bremer, and Tyler Dahlberg. Thank you.
So as we have our panelists come to the stage, maybe a way to introduce this this session is really in COVID in and of itself, because so much has changed in our world over the last 2 years, and a lot of that has to do with location intelligence, what we do with business intelligence, and so forth. So I know a lot of the speakers and moderators have thanked Sanjay and the team, and of course I add my thanks, but I'd also like to say thanks to each and every one of you for having the courage and taking the necessary steps to attend the GWF this fall. Location services for NextGen BI really start accelerating. So we know that the exponential growth of technological change is continuing to accelerate, which means that things are moving faster and faster in and around all of the technologies that are provided through GKI, through the infrastructure that we know as GKI. And due to the pandemic, businesses have really realized that the need to reach customers while they're at home instead of coming to their place of business has kind of changed the game. Of course, there were definitely private companies and other services, most notably things like post office, mail delivery, DHL, and the other providers as well, that routinely came to our homes. But more and more, we see everything from package delivery, organizations like Amazon and various private companies, but also food delivery and all these other kinds of things that are really moving towards reaching out to where their customer is at, not expecting the customer necessarily to come to their businesses. So as the economy really begins to reopen in many places around the globe, it becomes crucial for businesses to understand that evolving market behavior and patterns are not only changing, but they're changing rapidly. We've had many areas in the world where things would open up and close back down, and you can imagine the impacts on business. But what are the behavioral patterns that businesses need to understand? What are the pros and cons that businesses need to understand to be able to react and make quick decisions around customer demand and also customer expectations, which are changing and have been changing for a long time. And so we're starting to layer different things together. So with that, I'll start with the first question. And this panel is going to be a little bit different. I know the previous panels, people have made a small presentation, then some Q&A. I'd like to try to dedicate the entire time to discussion. I think that's really where some good conversations happen. So I will start with David. And I guess to add to John's introduction, I should say we have David Henderson with us. David is the Chief Geospatial Officer at Ordnance Survey in the UK. We have Bjoern Bremer, who is with the Ogilvy Group in Germany. And we have Tyler Dahlberg, who is the Senior Data Scientist with Booking.com. So I think we have a good cross-section of the end-user side of business intelligence and location services, and also from the provider side, perhaps. So I think the thing that is top of mind for many people is they're talking about location services, or how are location and spatial analytics impacting the next generation of business analytics. So I feel like we're moving up from business analytics 1.0, 2.0 to this next gen, and it's becoming something quite different as it matures. But from the consumer point of view, and also the provider role, what are the implications of that? Because that seems like a very kind of complex thing. I'd like to start with David.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Just add to the thanks to Sanjay and team for bringing us all together today. What a great question to start. And actually, I almost sort of fear that we can't do justice to the previous presentation because there's so many of the things that Robert was exploring in a macro sense. I think we might ground back into the world of business intelligence, and particularly when we're starting to talk about competitive advantage at a business level. I think for my organisation, Ordnance Survey in the UK is a location data business. And I think we're going through a really interesting transition with our users, whether those are government users, 5,000 user organisations across the UK government, our business partners, several hundred of those, and the very many hundred commercial businesses that use our data today. If there was one bit of feedback that they increasingly give us, is that they don't want to see us as a geospatial data provider, but as a partner in location insight, location analytics. And the recognition that the value they take from our data, from their data, from the data of many others, is the insight that they're able to derive, whether that's for better policy delivery, better service delivery, competitive advantage in their own business, but ultimately gaining much better insight for the end users that they're working with, whether they're citizens, whether they're customers, or partners that they're working with. I think I'm sure we're going to get into this conversation. One of the things that I guess we're really interested with as a business at the moment ourselves, and what this means for the world in which we operate, is that, and this probably is true for many of the friends that we have in this audience, is that we're a business of where. It was always about where. Everything happens somewhere, and we've talked about that for very many decades, right? I think in a relatively short period of time, the conversation has moved on to what and who. And that's become really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to know where something is, but we've become more interested in the thing. And it's quite comfortable when we're talking about what something is, a piece of infrastructure, a property, something that we can put something together about, a sensor. I'm wearing one, I've got another one in my pocket. The sensors are what we're all moving around sensors, but those sensors ultimately increasingly represent somebody or something of interest. And I think that's becoming quite challenging in a conversation sense that in the last conversation, some of this mornings, we started talking about privacy and ethics. So I think maybe just as a kind of an opening gambit, I think the conversation we're having is quite transformational. We're moving into a world where we stop talking about geospatial data and we start talking about the products of that data, which is ultimately insight and analytics. And I'll hand over and see what the other guys have got to say.
Thank you.
Well, if I can add to this, I'm very much at the end user side of it. And I think our lot is still have to catch up. What you give us is a richness of data and knowledge that is incredible. And more people even show us the visualization of what that is. And doing a fantastic job. And now it comes to us to, what do we actually do with that? How do we use this data to make sure that somebody buys A and not B, or votes for A or B, or selects a car A or B, etc. And I think there's still some catching up to do. And I think we have to, the communication is getting better. The stuff is still lost in translation. I'm sure at Booking.com, when you talk to your marketing folks, they go like, "What do you want from me?" and vice versa. But I think, at least our organization, we're sort of on a crusade. We believe that location data, and we fundamentally believe that, is almost the strongest, change maker or sales trigger you can find if you use it right. There's a lot more depth in location data, be it where, what, when, compared to, oh, it's a man or a woman. And we've seen evidence of that every day, and it's getting better. And it's, I think it's a hopefully exponentially growing path that we're all on.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on the sort of the challenge of consumers using the data, people taking advantage of the data, because I think that there's, as more and more information is produced, as it becomes easier and easier to use location data, there are more questions, and then it becomes more and more obvious that there might be a knowledge gap about how to actually take advantage of location data. Like in booking, we use location data in all sorts of different contexts, from marketing to machine learning to new product development, customer service, relocations, that kind of thing. But often what I see is that there's a gap between getting location data, having a lot of location data, and understanding that there are actually things that we can do with it, that there are practical questions that we can answer, that there are new things that we can build. And so I see part of location intelligence for me is helping to educate people that they can ask those questions, that we can use that data that way, that we can add additional context, because I think, sorry, David was saying that, like, you know, the world isn't just a bunch of what's anymore. That as we get more information, we can add a lot of context. We know what kinds of people visit this landmark. We know what time of year they visit this landmark. And so there's so much more information. It becomes so much more complex that I think there are huge opportunities for location intelligence. I just think and I don't even think that technology necessarily is the limiting factor. I think it's probably having the skills to answer those questions and being able to share that knowledge with enough people.
Very nice. Yeah, I agree that is definitely an emerging part of location intelligence overall. So it'll be interesting to see where that trajectory takes us over the next several years. There's a lot of questions around, because we are, location intelligence is rapidly evolving. I hear a lot of conversation and questions around, do I do this thing in-house and I want to keep all of my secret sauce secret? Or do I use commercial tools in order to enable my BI? Does anybody have any thoughts? Maybe starting with Bjoern in the middle this time and see how things are going at Ogilvy Group.
Well, half of my job, I'm a creative. I don't really care where the data is coming from, to be honest. I think this morning we had a presentation about open maps, and I think data should be open and almost free. I think the juicy bit gets when you visualize that, when you make it available, when you turn this into action. And obviously there are great companies that do a lot of the data gathering, but I think the further down you go to the chain, it becomes more important. Like you said, what do you do with this? I know that these many people go to that landmark. Okay, but what does that mean? Can I do anything with it? Can I sell beer? Can I not sell beer? Can I sell towels? Can I sell sun lotion? Can I don't know, open a new subway station because you need it? There's too much traffic in and out. I don't know, with COVID, people getting too close, etc. It's again, what do we do with this data, and how do we evolve it? So.
Sure. So I hear a lot about data and open data, which I'm very much in favor of, but I sort of view data as the ingredients. And the magic is happening in whatever recipe you put together with all of those bits of data that as things become more open, are more widely available to everyone. So we all get the same ingredients, but the dish doesn't taste the same necessarily. And so, David or Taylor, do you have anything that you could share along in-house versus commercial tools?
Yeah. So, I mean, booking has been around not nearly as long as the Ordnance survey, but we were a travel company, so we had a need to have geospatial data almost right from the get-go. And as the company scaled up, it basically just kind of had meteoric growth for a very long time. And so that meant that people were scrambling to keep up with the information that we needed to be able to say, like, okay, yes, this is a destination that you can book in Germany. This is a ski destination. These are all the hotels in this place. And so we have built a number of location tools in-house over the years, and some of those have aged really gracefully, because they were simple enough, they were purpose-built enough that, like, they do exactly what they need. And we still rely really heavily on them. And some have not aged as well. And so as we've grown and the number of people that create data has increased, we had some tools, for instance, where anybody could create a shape, so that, if a local expert knew more about a particular city in Italy, they could say, yes, this is the nice place to stay, this is the nice area, let me create this shape, we can show it on the website. That was really useful at first, but as the company grows and you have more and more people who have that ability, it becomes less of a benefit and more of a liability, because then you start having data quality issues. And so we've, I guess, always had a bias to insourcing, but we've seen where the limits of that are, I think, when it comes to location data. Like, we're not a GIS company. And I think for us, there's a team actually in Booking called the Geo Agency. They're part of our content agency. They build out a lot of content for us. And one of the things that they've been able to do is to really take control of our geodata, like ensure quality, and then also, once they kind of wrestled control of our geodata, started to build tools and services so that people could access it in a controlled way, so that things could be modified in a controlled way. So I think that we still have a strong bias to building things ourselves, but I think that we're becoming more open to the idea of licensing software like Esri, or working with companies to think about, like, what can we do to view and edit and improve our geospatial data, because we don't want to hold ourselves back with internal tools either.
Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting point about sort of strategic advantage, isn't there? So I mean, I think on one level, you can't get away from the fact that data is valuable to any organization. The data they hold about their customers is going to give them competitive advantage, and we shouldn't sort of be naive, I guess, around some of that. I guess, however, transparency becomes increasingly important. And I've got 2 teenage sons who have become more and more interested in the way in which their data is used. Yes, by government, maybe through the likes of the last 18 months, but also through business, the social media platforms they engage with and everything else. And I think they're not naive to the point. They're both studying business studies at college and the like, so that they know that data is important. They know that data insights are valuable to a company. They kind of get their head around that. But they do want to understand the transparency of how their data is being used. And I think that becomes quite interesting. So yes, I think there's a degree of black box, if you like, in terms of the way that data is used, that insights are created. Companies will choose to use that effectively or perhaps ineffectively. It's their kind of prerogative to do that. But I think customers, consumers, society at large wants to see a certain degree of transparency in the way that data is being used. And I think that becomes really important and beholden upon all of us that are involved in analytics, I guess, to make sure that we share that in a way that is open in some regards along that line. I think I can't really speak to the importance of insourcing or not for the capability.
Sure, no. Well, thank you for that, because that leads into my next question, which is it's difficult to talk about location intelligence and not have the topic of privacy come up. And so are you able to share how stringent, less stringent, rapidly changing, back and forth, all variations of privacy policy that are occurring globally have impacted your business intelligence, whether that's directly through policy or perhaps it's related to precision and accuracy and those types of things? Maybe, Taylor, you could start?
Yeah, so I think it's it represents a real, I guess, a challenge and an opportunity. The increase in there's an increased awareness of privacy. I think that there are terms that get floated now, like the right to be forgotten. There's the General Data Protection Regulation, which I'm from Iowa in the U.S., and I can't even view the local news back home, because if I try to visit the website, they've essentially opted out of complying, and so they just say, oh, you don't live in this region, so you can't view this information. But for us at Booking, privacy is really important because we're working with customer data. Like that's our bread and butter. It's our oil, so to speak, and so it's essential to protect it as much as we can. And because people are sharing information with us, we need to be the stewards of that information. And as devices like iPhones, iOS devices, now they have privacy features built in. I'm sure it's probably happening on Android as well. It means that location data is potentially going to become a little bit more scarce on the customer side, because it's going to be gated behind more privacy features. And I think that'll be a little bit tough to deal with in the short term. I think it represents also an opportunity, because we've been having a lot of conversations about, okay, what do we do? Like, how do we deal with these impending changes? Like, I'm sure you're aware that maybe Google is intending to change the way that third-party cookies are used in Chrome, which is going to affect the way that a lot of organizations can collect user data. Perhaps someday there might be some strong privacy regulation in the US like there is in Europe. So these all represent, like, I guess, threats that mean that we need to refocus on why we're collecting the data from customers that we do, and then what is the real value that we get out of it. Because if we weren't using it, if they're taking it away and we didn't need it, then it wasn't all that valuable to us, and it's better for us not to be collecting it.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I think every time we have a meeting and the word data comes up, somebody says, bring in the lawyer. It's a challenge. Some people would argue it's horrible, but it's also the right thing to do. None of us want it to happen to ourselves. And I think too many companies are making their life easy, and they point their finger at, kind of like at the developed and undeveloped countries. Oh, the Google and Apple have to do that, and they'll figure it out, and then we get on with it. But I think we all, especially in our industry or sector, have a moral obligation to not cross, and we don't want to get a backlash either. And like you say, it's your bread and butter. This could really screw over the company almost if you get it wrong at some point. So it's every time it comes up, every time the question comes, is that too far? Is that too personal? Does it really help? Do we still need to do that? Or, can it be anonymous? Can it be helpful, etc.?
I think that's a really interesting point, because just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, and sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yeah, I think I come to a segue on that. Coming into this session today, there was the kind of context of the panel in some respects was, for a long time, consumers have gone to businesses. Increasingly, businesses know where their consumers are and they can engage with them at the point. I found that quite terrifying because I've been nowhere apart from my own house for the last 18 months. And so but I think, just on that case study alone, the amount that I observe people know about me and my place of work, my new place of work that is, has become quite terrifying. It was about 2.5 years ago that in the UK, Ordnance Survey was given the opportunity to partner with a number of organisations around what has developed into the Locus Charter. So we created in the UK the Benchmark Initiative, which was bring together a number of people and facilitate a conversation about privacy and ethics in geospatial data. We partnered latterly with the American geographers and the Ethical Geo Initiative. And I think the Locus Charter doesn't claim to solve the problem, but it absolutely plays a part in enabling a much more mature conversation from both data providers and data users around the importance of ethics and privacy and considerations in the way in which we're both collecting and using data. So I think to your point latterly there about, you might not have intended to use the data in that way, but the data then becomes available and I can gain insight from that data, whether or not that's appropriate, starts to be something which we've got to challenge ourselves around. So I think for us, we've been really proud to kind of engage in that conversation over the last 2 years. We've adopted the Locus Charter ourselves as an organization. We'd encourage others to do the same, because I think, as a conversation that, as a geospatial industry, it feels like a really important part of who we are and our maturity in the broader data industry, working with like these guys who are using data quite powerfully to gain insights about us, to hopefully provide us with better services. But all of that takes into the need to understand the kind of ethical considerations. And I think, to echo some of the things Robert was saying in the previous conversation, I think the notion of a transparent society that works for all is a good one in this context, in a business sense, but it puts a certain onus of maturity, I guess, on all stakeholders to use that opportunity effectively.
Yeah, an additional aspect that I can think of is if you're going to collect data, you have a responsibility to protect it. And with data breaches being a global daily occurrence now, being very intentional about why you collect a piece of data and very clear about why you're collecting that piece of data, I think is really important moving forward. Well, we're getting close to our end of our time, so maybe a final question here is that if we were to come back and sit on this stage in, say, 3 years, what kinds of things have changed in the location intelligence and the BI activities in your companies?
I mean, I can start because I can speak on behalf of the companies that use our data. But I mean, I think I observe a real sort of trend towards understanding the interactions between the real world and the kind of increasingly digital twin environment that we're talking about. I mean, I think the interactions of the planet is what makes life go round, right? And I think maybe 3 years, maybe quicker in some respects. I think there's an increasing demand not just to understand what the world looks like, but to understand the interactions that are happening within that. And I think with that is going to see an enormous amount of use of sensor-based data. And it's the richness of that data that's sensing objects that are moving, of people who are often associated with those objects, are going to start to become much more interesting for all of us. It can unlock huge potential for an efficient society. We're about to go into a decade of action around climate response and adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies that are going to absolutely be unlocked by those kind of technologies. But whilst we're getting excited about the positive application of those, we've got to be really conscious of the need to mitigate against doing the wrong things with some of that data, to your point, Elliot, because we can.
Great. Bjoern?
I think a lot will be about projection. I think right now location data is a lot about right now or yesterday. And we haven't really tackled what does that mean tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, especially with when people started moving again. How much are going to, can we build a digital twin where we say, okay, everybody's going to do 2 days at work or 3 days at work? What does it mean for the infrastructure of cities? What does it mean for your subscription for public transport, et cetera? So a lot of like looking forward and then, planning right now. Like, when we looked at this chart this morning with the world, when it's 2 degrees warmer, you saw all the floods and, that's too hot and stuff like that. I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to have 1 billion climate refugees? Where are they all going to go? Maybe we should show that senator in Dakota that half of them will actually move to Dakota, and if that's cheaper than spending some money on rescuing the climate right now. So, long story short, I think it will be a lot about projection and not so much, a little less about right now and maybe yesterday.
I think that the world has been changing so quickly. Like the situation on the ground has been changing so fast in so many places with regards to tourism, logistics. I don't know how many grocery delivery services have popped up in where you're from, but I've seen 4 or 5 pop up here in Amsterdam. There's all manner of things happening. And so I think that location intelligence needs to be, like you said, much more responsive, like really quick, being able to answer questions very quickly. The forecasting simulations, that's just technology, but I think also, I'm going to harp on another point I tried to make, is that I think all of us in this room, we're probably in a bit of a location bubble. And for me, at least, in the next 3 years, I would want to expand that bubble a bit in my organization so that more people are location aware, so that they're asking location questions. Because I've already seen people asking more pointed questions about what's happening where, because we're all aware that things are changing, within country, between country, due to restrictions. And so my hope is that, that the technology advances, but also that we can advance the wider world's understanding of how important location is, because I think that's where we can start getting more of the real value from it. It's your stakeholders, your partners.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for this discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.